Do it, someone might see, she warned. The cowboy acted, and the town froze. The cowboy had always been a quiet man. He lived on the edge of town, in a small wooden house that leaned slightly to one side. His life was simple, shaped by long days of work and quiet nights under the stars. People knew him mostly for his steady hands and the way he handled animals. Horses seemed to respect him. Cows followed his voice, and even the dogs in town would pause when he walked by. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. Not because he commanded attention, but because what he said felt measured, precise, and true. The town itself was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's history, whether they admitted it or not. Its wooden sidewalks creaked underfoot, and the wind that swept through carried the smell of dust and hay. The streets were narrow, lined with low buildings that housed a general store, a blacksmith, and a few homes. The saloon sat at the center, as it always did, offering a place to gather, drink, and exchange news. But despite its size, the town had eyes everywhere. Secrets were rare, and whispers traveled faster than footsteps. One afternoon, a woman arrived. She moved with care, as though every step was measured, every glance calculated. She was not new to hardship. Her eyes held stories that were not spoken aloud, and her hands were worn but steady. People in town noticed her, of course, though they did not approach. They could sense a certain quiet strength about her, a pride that demanded respect. She had not come to settle, nor had she come for attention. She was merely passing through, though the kind of presence she carried could not go unnoticed. The cowboy first saw her near the edge of the market, adjusting the straps on a small pack she carried. He didn't approach, for that was not his way, but something about her stance, the careful tilt of her head, and the way her eyes scanned the surroundings made him watch. He did not intend to linger. His work in town would be done soon, and he would return home. Yet there was a pull he could not explain. Later that evening, as the sun lowered itself behind the hills, the woman appeared near the creek that ran along the outskirts of the town. The water moved slowly, reflecting the gold and red streaks of the sky. She was crouched by the bank, testing the water with the tip of her hand, as if checking the flow and depth. The cowboy had been walking along the path, returning from the general store with a few supplies. When he saw her there, he paused a few steps away. "Evening," he said quietly, not a greeting to start a conversation, but acknowledgement of presence. The woman did not startle. She looked up at him, her expression calm, neutral. "Evening," she replied, her voice soft but firm. There was no invitation to come closer, but neither was there fear. He nodded once and continued to the creek's edge. "Quiet place," he said. "Easy to think here." She studied him for a moment, then nodded.
"Yes."
Quiet can be good sometimes, but it can also make you careless. The town watches, even when it doesn't seem to. Her words caught him off guard, not because they were strange, but because they carried weight. He had lived in the town long enough to know that everyone's eyes were always on someone. But no one spoke about it so plainly. Most kept warnings silent or masked them with stories and jokes. She said it openly, and there was no malice, only truth. He looked at her, trying to understand. "Do you know the town?" he asked.
"I've seen it," she said. "I know enough to know it doesn't forgive mistakes lightly."
"And I know enough to know when someone's about to make one." There was a pause, the kind that stretches seconds into eternity. The creek moved steadily, the sound of water over rocks filling the silence between them. The cowboy was not a man to act on impulse. He had spent years learning patience, letting things come to him, letting situations settle before stepping in. Yet her presence, and more importantly her words, unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. "What mistake?" he asked finally, though he did not step closer. She stood slowly, dusting off her hands. Her eyes met his directly, unwavering. "The kind that changes everything," she said. "Sometimes people act without thinking no one is watching. But someone always is. And sometimes someone seeing is the difference between regret and ruin." Her words were not a warning in the usual sense. There was no threat, no hidden threat of punishment. It was something heavier, a reminder that actions, once done, could not be undone. That even the quietest act could ripple through the town, reaching corners he hadn't considered. The cowboy studied her. He had spent much of his life measuring his steps carefully. Mistakes were expensive in a town like this, and reputations mattered. He had seen men ruined not by what they did in the open, but by what others witnessed in silence. Her caution, her insistence on visibility, was a challenge as much as advice. "Someone might see," he repeated, almost to himself. She gave him a faint nod, a small confirmation. "And if they do, you must be ready. There is no turning back." He didn't respond. Words weren't needed. The gravity of her warning hung between them, heavier than the air at dusk. He felt the pull of responsibility, a weight he was familiar with but had not fully considered in this moment. This wasn't about work, nor about pride, nor about the daily rhythm of life. This was about a choice, one that would test judgment, courage, and awareness of the town itself. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves along the creek. It carried the scent of dust and wood smoke, of life continuing despite the tension between them. The woman adjusted the pack on her back as though preparing to leave, though she did not move immediately. She seemed patient, as if she had all the time in the world, knowing that he would decide his next step carefully. The cowboy shifted his weight, watching the water, then looking at her. There was something almost invisible in her posture, a steady expectation. She was not asking for heroism nor offering it. She was offering clarity, a choice, visible and inevitable. "Evening grows late," he said finally. "You should move on." She did not smile, though her eyes hinted at understanding. Perhaps, the evening only begins now. Some things demand attention when no one is ready. He could not ignore her words. They settled in his mind, weaving into the quiet rhythm of his thoughts. That night, as he returned to his small wooden house, he carried her warning with him. It was not a burden in the traditional sense, but a responsibility, the kind that would require patience, judgment, and courage. He lit a lantern, letting the warm glow fill the small room. The shadows danced along the walls, casting shapes that seemed to mimic the tension he felt. Outside, the town slept quietly, unaware of the invisible threads pulling at the edges of its daily life. And yet someone had spoken, and someone had listened. That alone was enough to set the stage for what would come next. In that quiet house, with only the creak of wood and the distant call of a night bird, the cowboy thought carefully. Decisions were not to be made lightly here. Actions had consequences, and consequences were amplified when others watched. The warning she gave him, simple, precise, and quietly urgent, would stay with him. It would influence every step he took in the coming days. He did not know yet what the town would see, nor what would unfold from that small warning, but he understood its truth. In a town like theirs, one act, witnessed or not, could change everything. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the memory of her words, a soft echo against the wooden houses, the empty streets, and the quiet man who would soon be faced with a choice he could not ignore. The next morning the cowboy rose early, as he always did. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when he stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of smoke from the chimneys and the soft earthiness of the town's outskirts. He took a deep breath, letting the quiet settle around him. Yet, despite the stillness, he could not shake the echo of her warning from the night before. "Do it, someone might see," she had said. The words repeated in his mind, not as a threat, but as a reminder. Every action had a weight, and the town, whether seen or unseen, would remember. He had spent years thinking only of work and routine, trusting in the slow pace of life to shield him from mistakes. But her words demanded attention, forced him to consider consequences he had not yet faced. He walked to the stable, tending to the horses with careful, practiced hands. Each movement was deliberate, brushing their coats, checking their hooves, ensuring they had water and feed. Normally, these tasks soothed him, offering rhythm and predictability. Today, though, even the familiar chores felt charged, as though the very air around him held expectation. The cowboy wondered if the town was already watching, invisible eyes tracking his steps as he moved through the day. By mid-morning, he found himself near the edge of town, close to where the creek ran. He did not expect to see her again, yet there she was, standing on the opposite bank, her eyes fixed on him. She did not wave or call out, she simply waited. Her presence was quiet, but it carried the same tension as her words the night before. It was as though she had come back not to speak, but to ensure he remembered the choice that awaited him. The cowboy approached cautiously, keeping his tone neutral.
"You're early," he said. She gave a small nod, neither confirming nor denying.
"The morning is the best time to see things clearly," she replied. "People move slower. Mistakes are easier to notice before they grow too large." He studied her. There was no fear in her eyes, only certainty. She had lived with caution, and it showed in every movement she made. Yet there was something else, something almost daring, in the way she held herself. It was a subtle challenge, like a test he did not fully understand. "What do you expect me to do?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. Her gaze did not waver. "Dan, nothing yet. Watch. Listen. Think. Think. The right time will come, and you will know." He frowned slightly, uncomfortable with ambiguity. The cowboy was a man of action, of decisions measured but direct. Hesitation made him uneasy, yet her words demanded patience, and patience had its own kind of power. He could feel it pressing against him, urging him to wait, to watch the world move before stepping forward. For the next few hours he remained near the creek, tending to small tasks, mending tools, and observing the movement of people in town. From this distance, the daily rhythm became clearer. Farmers carried buckets and bundles of hay. Children ran between buildings, and merchants arranged goods outside their stores. It seemed ordinary, almost mundane, yet beneath the ordinary, the town thrummed with unspoken judgment. Every glance, every pause in conversation, every sideways look had meaning, and he knew that even the smallest act could ripple across the streets. Around midday, the woman finally spoke again, her voice low and careful. "Do you understand why I warned you?" she asked. He paused, unsure how to answer. "I understand that something I do could be seen," he said finally. "And that the town will notice." She shook her head slightly, a faint movement that suggested patience more than frustration. "It is not what they see, it is how they see it, and how they remember it. The act itself may be small, but its mark lasts. That is the part most people ignore." He nodded slowly. trying to absorb the meaning. Her words were not cryptic, yet they carried weight beyond their surface. He realized she spoke from experience, not her own perhaps, but from understanding the world and its hidden eyes. He had lived in the town for years, thinking he understood its rhythm, but she had already revealed a layer he had never noticed. As the afternoon approached, the cowboy could feel the tension in his own mind growing. The decision he faced was no longer hypothetical. Even the quietest choices he knew now could be seen, judged, and remembered. The woman did not push him, but her presence made the inevitability of action clear. He could delay, hesitate, or ignore the warning, but eventually, something would require a response. And when that moment came, he would have to act with awareness of every eye that might witness him. He decided to take a walk through the town, moving slowly along the wooden sidewalks. He greeted a few familiar faces, all polite but reserved. Conversations paused as he passed, though no one said anything aloud. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but he noticed. The town's attention was alive, attentive even when it appeared absent. He felt the weight of observation, the invisible pressure of people waiting for something to happen. The woman walked beside him, keeping pace without speaking. Her eyes scanned the streets as if reading the town itself, noting every glance, every pause, every small gesture. He realized that she understood the rhythm of the town better than anyone he had known. She knew what to notice, what to ignore, and what could erupt into consequence. Finally, they stopped near the old blacksmith's shop, where the forge had long gone cold. Dust lay on the windows and the doors were slightly ajar. He turned to her, feeling a growing awareness of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. "And if I do it?" he asked. "If I act, as you suggested?" She looked at him steadily, her expression calm but unwavering. "Then you must be ready for what follows. The town does not forgive easily. It remembers long after people think they have moved on. Every action leaves a mark. The question is whether you are willing to bear it." He considered her words carefully. Acting would not be simple. It would demand courage, judgment, and foresight. The town would notice. People would remember. Yet to hesitate forever was also a choice, one that carried its own weight. Sometimes inaction was a quieter kind of failure, a way for responsibility to pass without resolution. The sun was high now, burning gently over the streets, casting shadows that stretched across the wooden planks. The cowboy could feel the eyes of the town on him, even though no one spoke. Each glance from a window, each whispered conversation, contributed to the tension, reminding him that someone might see, and what was seen could not be unseen. He glanced at her, and for the first time, he felt a spark of understanding. She was not asking for action blindly. She was offering a choice, a moment of clarity, a test of awareness. To act recklessly would be easy. To act without thought would be natural. But to act with full knowledge of observation, with awareness of consequences, required strength. It required him to step beyond the ordinary rhythm of life he had known, to accept responsibility in a way he had not yet faced. Hours passed as they stood in quiet conversation, though much of it was internal, a shared understanding more than spoken words. He realized that this moment, simple, unremarkable to anyone else, carried the weight of decision. In a town that remembered everything, he would be tested not by the act itself, but by the choice to act deliberately, knowing every eye could be upon him. By late afternoon, the woman finally moved on, leaving the cowboy alone near the blacksmith's shop. Her presence lingered, like the faint smell of smoke that remained after a fire had burned. He watched her walk down the street, every step measured, every glance purposeful. She disappeared from sight, but the memory of her words remained. an invisible guide pressing him toward awareness and responsibility. The cowboy returned to his home slowly, each step heavy with thought. That night, as he sat by his small fire, he reflected on the day. He had learned something vital, that the simplest acts, the quietest choices, could echo far beyond intention. The woman's warning had opened his eyes to a truth he had long avoided. Decisions were never isolated. Someone might see, and someone would remember. That awareness changed everything. He knew that the moment to act would come, and when it did, it would demand courage he had not yet called upon. The town would be watching. He could not pretend otherwise, and he understood now that patience, observation, and readiness were just as important as action itself. As the fire burned low, he felt the weight of the coming days pressing down. He could not predict what would happen, but he could prepare. And preparation, he realized, was a form of strength in itself. The following morning, the cowboy woke with the weight of yesterday still pressing on him. The memory of her words, sharp and clear, echoed in his mind. Do it. Someone might see. He had spent the night thinking about what she meant, what action she had implied, and the consequences that would follow. He knew that hesitation could not last forever. Choices had a way of forcing themselves into the present, whether one was ready or not. He dressed quietly and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sun was still low, casting a pale light across the town. The streets were already stirring with activity, merchants arranging their goods, children running along the sidewalks, and townsfolk greeting each other in low, familiar voices. The rhythm of life seemed ordinary, yet he could feel the tension beneath it, like a quiet current running through everything. He walked toward the center of town, past the saloon and the general store, feeling the eyes of the town without needing them to be spoken aloud. People glanced in his direction, some with curiosity, some with recognition, but all with a subtle awareness that something was shifting. Even without knowing the reason, the town could sense when something important was about to happen. He understood now that he was not merely a participant in life. He was about to become the center of a moment that would be remembered. The woman appeared again, standing near the corner of the market, her presence calm but deliberate. She did not speak immediately, only watched, her gaze steady. It was as though she were giving him permission to act, but also testing whether he could handle the responsibility that came with it. He felt a mix of anticipation and unease. This was the moment when inaction could be as dangerous as a wrong step, and he had no desire to misjudge it. He paused for a long moment, taking in the people moving through the streets, the shops opening, and the soft sound of life continuing around him. He noticed small details he had never seen before. The way the blacksmith's apron hung from a hook, the faint streaks of mud on a child's shoes, the way the sunlight caught the edge of the water in the trough outside the stables. The town was alive in ways that went unnoticed daily, but now he saw it all clearly. Finally, he made his choice. Not because he wanted attention, and not because he sought drama, but because he understood that some moments demanded action. He moved slowly and deliberately, making his way to a small, forgotten square near the edge of town. It was a place where few stopped, a quiet corner overshadowed by larger buildings, and yet he knew that someone might see, that every step could be observed by someone who cared to look. The woman followed at a respectful distance, her eyes on him, silent but attentive. He reached into his coat pocket, feeling the weight of his decision pressing into his palm. It was a simple act, yet it carried a significance he could not ignore. The town had a way of amplifying small things, turning them into stories that would linger long after the moment had passed. He thought of her warning again, The caution in her voice, the way she had made him aware that someone might see, that awareness had transformed hesitation into resolve. He acted, slowly, carefully, but with clear intention. It was a gesture, small and deliberate, one that any passer-by might overlook if they were not paying attention. But it was enough. Enough to mark the moment, enough to set in motion a chain of observation that could not be undone. For a brief instant, he felt the familiar comfort of routine dissolve, replaced by the raw awareness of responsibility. Every movement mattered now. Every second counted. And then he noticed it, the shift in the town. The first person had seen him. A merchant paused mid-step, hand frozen over a basket of goods. A child stopped laughing, tilting their head toward him with curiosity. Conversation faltered, voices lowering, as eyes turned subtly in his direction. The cowboy realized that the act, though small, had not gone unnoticed. The town, silent yet alert, was watching, and their attention was heavy, expectant, and unyielding. He did not step back. The woman did not intervene. Both of them understood that retreat would diminish the moment, that hesitation now could unravel the clarity of the action. Instead, they stood, quietly acknowledging the shift. The town had paused, not in anger, but in awareness. Every glance, every half-step, every frozen gesture became part of the story, etching the act into memory. For a few long moments, there was nothing but stillness. The cowboy could feel the weight of eyes pressing upon him, not as threat, but as recognition. People were not shouting or pointing. They were silently assessing, cataloging, remembering. He felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Pride because he had acted deliberately, with awareness and integrity. Unease because he knew the town's memory was long, and judgment often lingered longer than understanding. As the moments stretched, the first whispers began. Soft, cautious, almost imperceptible. A merchant murmured to a neighbor. A child repeated something to a friend. A passerby tilted their head in thought. The sound spread slowly, like a faint ripple across still water. The cowboy could not hear every word, but he sensed the growing awareness. The town was awake now, attuned to the smallest shift, and he had become the center of its attention. The woman finally stepped closer, her voice low and deliberate.
"Do you feel it?" she asked.
He nodded slowly. Yes.
They're watching, not because of what you did, she said, but because of why you did it. People always notice intention. It carries farther than action alone. And now, they will remember. He understood. The act itself was simple, almost ordinary. But intention, clarity, and courage had transformed it into something extraordinary. The town's silence was not indifference. It was acknowledgement. The pause in daily life, the frozen gestures, and the careful whispers were all a part of the town's way of recording memory. What had been a small choice now held significance beyond the immediate moment. Hours passed as the town continued its day. The cowboy remained in the square, quietly observing. He noticed that people had returned to their routines, but with subtle changes. The baker's eyes lingered longer on him. The blacksmith worked more deliberately, pausing as if recalling something. Even children moved differently, their curiosity tempered by awareness. The town was still alive, yet the act had left an invisible mark, shaping the way people noticed, remembered, and reacted. The woman stayed nearby, her presence calm but attentive. She did not speak again, letting the moment unfold, letting the town process what had occurred. He realized that her warning had prepared him not just to act, but to withstand the aftermath. The town's eyes could be heavy, curious, even judgmental, but they could also be patient. And that patience was a gift, a chance to navigate the consequences with integrity and awareness. By evening, the square had emptied, and the sun cast long shadows across the wooden planks. The cowboy walked slowly back to his home, feeling the weight of the day and the action he had taken. The town was quiet again, but he knew that nothing had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Something had shifted. A moment had been recorded in memory, subtle but undeniable. As he entered his small home, he thought of the woman's words. One last time for the day. Do it. Someone might see. The phrase had guided him through hesitation, doubt, and the first tremors of consequence. It had reminded him that awareness was as important as action, that responsibility carried weight, and that courage often demanded clarity in the presence of others. He sat by the fire that evening, feeling the quiet settle around him. The town's pause had left him reflective, aware of both his power and his vulnerability. Actions mattered, he realized, but so did understanding. The woman had shown him that sometimes the smallest act, done with intention and in full view, could alter perception, awaken awareness, and shape the course of memory. And as night fell, the cowboy knew that the coming days would require even more patience, courage, and awareness. The town had seen, and the town would remember. But now he was ready. He had acted deliberately, faced the pause of consequence, and understood the weight of observation. The moment had passed, but its impact had only begun. The next morning, the cowboy awoke to a quiet that felt heavier than usual. The town had resumed its daily rhythm, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a subtle tension in the air, like the calm before a storm, a weight that pressed on everyone. Whether they acknowledged it or not, the cowboy sensed it immediately, not from voices or obvious signs, but from the way people moved through the streets. There were glances, pauses, and slight shifts in behavior that told him everything. The town remembered. He dressed carefully, taking a moment to consider the day ahead. It was not the physical work that concerned him, for he had spent a lifetime with horses, tools, and hard labor. It was the unseen pressure, the invisible attention that now seemed to accompany every step. Even small gestures, like greeting a neighbor or tending to a horse, felt loaded with consequence. He understood that his action from the day before, though small, had not been forgotten. It had been noticed and recorded in the town's quiet memory. The woman appeared again, standing at the edge of the street, watching him as he stepped outside. She did not smile, nor did she speak immediately. Her eyes held the same calm intensity as before, but there was also a hint of something more, concern, perhaps, or expectation. She had warned him, guided him, and now she observed how he would carry the weight of his choice. He approached her slowly. "They remember," he said. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Of course they do. People in this town may not speak openly about what they see, but they never forget. Every act leaves a mark, and some marks take time to fade." He considered her words carefully. It was one thing to act with awareness, to make a deliberate choice in view of the town. It was another to live with the consequences that followed. Some consequences were immediate, obvious, and easy to respond to. Others were slow, subtle, almost invisible, yet their impact was no less real. The cowboy had now entered that latter category, walking through a day that would demand patience, observation, and steady nerves. He moved through the town cautiously, tending to his usual tasks. He checked on the horses, swept the porch of his small home, and walked along the streets with measured steps. People acknowledged him with nods or quiet greetings, but there was a shift in tone, a subtle distance that had not existed before. He could feel it, though he could not see it fully. The town was reacting, slowly and deliberately, to the act he had committed, the act that someone might have seen. At the general store, the cashier paused as he entered, placing a package of goods carefully on the counter before speaking. "Morning," she said, her voice neutral but her eyes lingering longer than usual. He nodded, keeping his expression calm, and paid for the supplies without comment. He knew that every interaction, no matter how small, would now be influenced by yesterday's action. The town's memory had shifted, and with it, the landscape of social interaction. Outside, children ran along the sidewalks, their laughter muted, more cautious than usual. He noticed the way they stopped mid-step when he passed, tilting their heads as if observing carefully. Even their play had been altered subtly, shaped by awareness and the unseen story that had begun to ripple through the streets. The cowboy understood that these small, almost invisible reactions were as much a part of the consequences as any words of confrontation. By midday, he felt the weight of observation pressing more heavily. People he had known for years behaved differently. A neighbor who usually waved passed him with a stiff nod. A regular visitor at the stables lingered near the fence, talking quietly to someone else as he approached. Even the merchant seemed hesitant, pausing in the midst of arranging goods, as if considering whether to speak or look away. The cowboy realized that his presence now carried an unspoken tension. The town had paused, observed, and catalogued the act he had taken, and every eye that had seen it carried a story, a judgment, or a question. He sought refuge near the creek, the same place where the woman had first warned him. The flowing water offered a small sense of calm, a rhythm that was familiar and steady. He knelt by the bank, letting his fingers brush the surface, watching ripples spread outward. Yet even here there was no escape from consequence. The town, in its quiet way, had already begun to adjust to the presence of what had occurred. He understood that observation and memory were not passive. They shaped thought, behavior, and expectation. The woman approached again, her pace measured, her expression calm. "It is one thing to act," she said, "and another to live with what follows. Some people will judge, some will question, and some will remember, waiting for a second act to see if it aligns with the first." He nodded. "I can feel it. Even small gestures, the way people move, the way they speak, it all changes." "Yes," she replied. Consequences are rarely immediate. They come slowly, quietly, often without words. And yet they are as real as any spoken accusation or public reaction. The town watches, and even when it seems indifferent, it is calculating, remembering, and waiting. He understood fully now. The cowboy had acted with awareness, but action was only the first step. Living with the aftermath required steadiness, patience, and courage. Every glance, every pause, every subtle shift in behavior was part of the consequence. And as much as he wished to move forward, he could not ignore the silent pressure that surrounded him. By late afternoon, the town's reactions had grown more pronounced, though still subtle. People he passed on the street lingered in conversation a little longer than usual, glancing in his direction while speaking. Merchants adjusted their goods with care, as if ensuring nothing in their display drew attention away from him. Even the children, who had previously run freely along the sidewalks, kept closer to the adults, their curiosity tempered by awareness. The cowboy walked steadily through it all, neither retreating nor confronting directly. He understood that the town's memory was patient and observant. It did not need to confront him openly. Its silence, its pauses, and his glances carried a weight far greater than words could. The act had already created ripples, and the waves continued to move outward, influencing behavior and perception. In the evening, he returned to his home, the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders. He lit a fire and sat quietly, reflecting on the subtle yet undeniable consequences of his choice. The town had noticed, remembered, and reacted, not through anger, but through observation. Each person carried a piece of the story, catalogued silently in thought and memory. He realized that living with consequences was a different kind of work, demanding constant awareness and quiet strength. The woman appeared one last time that day, standing at the edge of the street near his home. She did not speak, only observed. He nodded once in acknowledgement, understanding that her presence was a reminder that the consequences were ongoing and that patience was necessary. She had prepared him for the act itself, and now she prepared him for the aftermath, the slow, deliberate unfolding of awareness and judgment that could not be rushed or ignored. Night fell over the town, casting long shadows across the wooden sidewalks and narrow streets. The cowboy sat by his fire, feeling the quiet settle around him. The weight of observation, the ripple of consequence, and the town's subtle reactions all pressed on him, yet he understood them now. He had acted deliberately, faced the pause of awareness, and was learning to navigate the delicate balance of consequence and responsibility. As the fire burned low, he thought about the days to come. The town's eyes would remain on him, some with curiosity, some with judgment, and some with quiet respect. Each glance, each pause, each unspoken reaction would be part of the unfolding story. And he would face it, step by step, with steady hands, careful thought, and the quiet courage that had guided him through life before. The act itself was done, but the struggle had just begun. Living with consequences required patience, awareness, and resolve. The town had paused, watched, and remembered, and he was now part of its memory. Every step forward would carry the weight of that observation. Every word spoken would be measured, and every choice would be guided by the understanding that someone might see, and someone would remember. The night grew deeper, and the cowboy finally allowed himself to rest. The fire glowed softly, illuminating the small wooden room. Outside, the town slept quietly, unaware of the subtle currents that moved beneath its surface. And yet, the story continued. The act had been done, and the consequences would continue to unfold, shaping thought, perception, and awareness in ways that were unseen but undeniable. He closed his eyes, understanding fully now that patience, reflection, and quiet strength were as essential as action itself. The town had noticed, and the town would remember, and he would remain steady, facing the consequences of choice with the same deliberate care that had guided him through every other challenge in his life. The next morning, the cowboy awoke to a quiet that was no longer heavy, but filled with a sense of careful anticipation. The town had shifted. Its subtle tension from previous days remained, but now it carried a different quality, one of curiosity, reflection, and cautious acknowledgement. The cowboy knew that his action had rippled through the town, leaving an invisible mark that could not be undone. He understood now that resolution would not come from words, nor from public approval, but from the careful navigation of what had been set into motion. He dressed slowly, taking his time. Each movement was deliberate, measured, as if the rhythm of preparation could steady both mind and spirit. The day promised to be ordinary in appearance, but the cowboy knew it would not be so. The town was awake to the act, its eyes attentive, its memory sharp, and its people waiting, not in anger, but in quiet observation. He stepped outside, letting the morning light wash over him, and took a deep breath. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of wood smoke and dust, carrying the familiar hum of the town coming alive. The woman appeared as she had for the past few days, standing at the edge of the street. She watched him, her presence calm and composed. There was no urgency in her posture, only quiet assurance, as though she understood that this day would reveal more than any words could explain. The cowboy nodded in acknowledgement, feeling the weight of shared understanding between them. She had guided him to act, and now she observed how he would carry the consequences to their natural conclusion. He walked slowly into the center of town, moving deliberately along the wooden sidewalks. People noticed him immediately, as they had before, but this time the tension was different. Faces that had been hesitant now held subtle acknowledgement. Eyes that had been cautious now carried a quiet respect. The cowboy could feel the town's pulse, slow but steady, and he understood that his choice had begun to resonate not only as an act, but as a demonstration of intention, courage, and awareness. The general store's cashier greeted him with a small, genuine smile. "Morning," she said, her tone lighter than in previous days. Her eyes held a hint of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of what he had done, and how he had borne the town's watchful attention. He nodded, returning the gesture with the same quiet respect that had always been his way. The town's reaction, subtle and measured, was beginning to shift toward understanding. The woman joined him as they walked together through the streets. She did not speak immediately, letting the rhythm of life guide their steps. The townsfolk watched, but there was no judgment in their gaze now, only awareness. The cowboy felt a small but growing sense of relief. He understood that the hardest part of action was not the deed itself, but living with the ripple of consequences that followed. And now, those ripples were beginning to settle. At midday, the cowboy paused near the creek, the same place that had marked the beginning of the story. He knelt by the bank, letting his fingers brush the water's surface. Ripples spread outward, and he watched them carefully, reflecting on the passage of time and the quiet unfolding of consequence. The town had observed, recorded, and reacted, and now, slowly, it was ready to resume a rhythm that included acknowledgement and perhaps even understanding. The woman stood behind him, her eyes following the gentle flow of the creek. "You've carried it well," she said softly. "Few people understand that action is only part of the story. Living with what follows and maintaining awareness, patience, and care is what defines true responsibility." He looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't easy, he admitted. Even small things people notice, and even when they don't speak, their eyes remember. Their memory is longer than I expected. And she nodded. That is the way of life in a town like this. What is done is seen, and what is seen is remembered. You've learned not only to act, but to live with attention and integrity. That is what makes a difference. By afternoon, the town had begun to return to its usual rhythm, though subtly changed. Merchants moved with ease, children played without hesitation, and neighbors greeted each other with gentle familiarity. Yet there was a quiet awareness that had settled into daily life, a recognition that small acts, when done deliberately, could carry significance beyond what was immediately visible. The cowboy could see it in the way people observed each other, in the pauses of conversation, and in the way simple gestures now seemed measured, thoughtful, and deliberate. The woman walked beside him, her presence steady, offering reassurance without words. They passed the blacksmith, who paused in his work and nodded subtly, acknowledging the cowboy's careful navigation of consequence. Even the baker, who had seemed distant in previous days, offered a polite smile as he entered the store. The town was no longer frozen, no longer uncertain. It was beginning to integrate the act, the awareness, and the quiet lessons of responsibility into its everyday life. In the late afternoon, the cowboy and the woman reached the outskirts of town. The sun hung low, casting long, soft shadows across the ground. They paused for a moment, taking in the scene. The wooden buildings, the narrow streets, and the townsfolk moving with calm purpose. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary, because everything had shifted subtly. The town had seen, remembered, and adapted. The ripple of a single act had traveled through observation, memory, and reflection, leaving a mark that was neither destructive nor punitive, but quietly instructive. The woman finally spoke again. "The town has begun to understand," she said. "Not everyone, not immediately, but enough. Enough to allow life to continue with awareness and care. You've seen the hardest part, action, and now you are learning the subtler work, patience, observation, and quiet guidance." He nodded slowly, feeling the truth in her words. The act itself had been simple, deliberate, and visible, but the aftermath required skill, integrity, and calm strength. Living with consequence, he realized, was a constant process. Each day presented subtle choices, opportunities to maintain awareness, and chances to act with understanding. He had learned not only to move carefully, but to carry the ripple of effect responsibly, with integrity and patience. As evening approached, the cowboy returned to his home. He sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the days that had passed. The town had reacted, observed, and integrated the moment into its collective memory. His action had set things in motion, but he had weathered the pause, navigated the awareness, and allowed life to continue. The woman's warning had guided him, her presence had supported him, and now he understood the full meaning of responsibility. Deliberate action, mindful observation, and the patience to live with consequences. Outside, the town was calm. The streets were quiet, the wooden sidewalks glowing softly in the evening light. People moved through their routines, now carrying awareness of what had occurred, but without fear or judgment. The cowboy watched, understanding that the town's memory was longer than words, but also capable of recognition, patience, and subtle acknowledgement. The act had been done, the consequences felt, and the town had adapted in quiet, thoughtful ways. The woman appeared one last time at the edge of his property. She did not speak, only observed. He approached her, and they shared a brief, quiet nod. No words were necessary. The story had reached its natural resolution. The cowboy had acted deliberately, lived with the consequences, and navigated the subtle awareness of a town that would remember. In doing so, he had earned both understanding and respect, not through drama, not through confrontation, but through careful action and patient observation. Night settled over the town, casting long shadows across the wooden streets and narrow alleys. The cowboy sat by his fire, letting the warmth settle in his chest. He reflected on the journey, the warning, the decision, the act, and the subtle unfolding of consequence. Life was rarely simple, rarely predictable, and often shaped by observation, memory, and awareness. He had learned the quiet power of action, the subtle weight of responsibility, and the lasting impact of living with both courage and care. And in the end, he knew that the town would continue to live, work, and observe. Its memory would remain long, its attention subtle but steady, and he would continue to act, observe, and carry the lessons of awareness with him, step by step, day by day. The moment had passed, but its lessons endured, shaping thought, perception, and behavior for years to come. He glanced at the stars above, feeling a quiet sense of closure. The act, the pause, the observation, and the integration of consequence had all been part of a larger rhythm. The town, the woman, and he himself had moved through it together, learning the value of awareness, the weight of responsibility, and the quiet power of deliberate, mindful action. As sleep approached, he closed his eyes, feeling calm for the first time in days. The town had paused, watched, remembered, and moved forward. And so had he. The story, though now complete, would linger, not as drama or spectacle, but as a quiet, living lesson in the value of action, observation, and responsibility.